What's older than we think? The aux connector that we still use for headphones and speakers was invented in 1877. There have been improvements since, but the basics of it are pretty much the same. https://n.mwikipediaorg/wiki/phone_connector_audio. Beer is thought to be older than bread. It's much easier to fill a jar with wheat and water, let it ferment, and brew beer than it is to grind grain, mix it, and bake it. The fact that the lighter is older than the match shook my head as a kid. It also gave me the curiosity to question things that seems obvious. Wristwatches. Queen Elizabeth I got one in 1571. National Geographic was founded in 1888. I was really surprised to discover when Oxford University was founded they don't know the year for sure, but they know there was definitely teaching going on there in 1096. Escalators have been around since 1859, though they were called rotating stairs. The electric car. What is likely the first human carrying electric vehicle with its own power source was along a Paris street in April 1881 by French inventor Gustave Trouvé. The first crude electric car was built in the 1830s, but it was essentially a semi-functioning model. The electric car was a direct competitor to gasoline powered vehicles until the 1920s, when roads got better. People started driving further than the range of an electric car, and the world started finding major oil reserves. Newgrange in Ireland. It's a man-made Neolithic stone structure that predates the Great Pyramids and Stonehenge. It's a wonder that it isn't one of the great wonders of the world. Here is a fantastic video on it. Geographics is a great channel all around. Sharks. Sharks as a species are older than trees. Cruise control, power windows and automatic headlights. I saw all three on a 1955 Cadillac-O, and the radio on it had a seek function. The ancient Romans, well, the wealthy ones, had central heating in their homes. You can actually still see the pipes in some of the buildings at Herculaneum. Fax machines. They were invented in 1843 before the telephone. https://www.thoughtco.com/history of the fax machine. 1,991,379. The sentiment that modern society is degenerate and that the youth are to blame is Ike. One of the oldest things we have written down that I can remember off the top of my head. Cato the Elder complained that the younger generations were becoming too Greek, and Socrates used to complain that the younger generations were ruining their brains by writing instead of memorizing information. There are far more older examples, but those are the oldest I remember. Maybe Socrates was onto something. Edit. A few people have pointed out the Socrates thing is a misquote, so maybe Pseudo-Socrates was onto something. Instead equals L. Flushing toilets date all the way back to the Indus River Valley civilization, back in 2000 BC. Oreos. I was shocked to learn that Oreos predate chocolate chip cookies, sliced bread, and my 100-year-old great-grandmother. Paul Rudd. Brain surgery. In 1997, archaeologists discovered an ancient tomb in the French village of Ensishim from 5000 BC, which contained the decomposing wire of a 50-year-old man with holes in his skull. After a thorough examination, it was determined that the holes, located near the frontal lobe, were caused by a type of surgery, not by forced trauma, and the operation appears to have been successful because the wounds healed before the patient's death. To this day, however, researchers cannot say for sure what exactly the surgery was trying to fix. The name Tiffany, it dates back to the 12th century and has actually led to a thing in writing called the Tiffany problem, because you can have a well-researched historical novel that people just don't buy into because you named your 12th century peasant Tiffany. It just sounds laughably anachronistic. Sharks as a species. They are older than the rings of Saturn. Nintendo. This company was actually created in 1889. Contraceptives such as S were around a very long time and made of hard leather. I don't know if this counts, but dinosaurs lived on the earth a lot longer than most people think. When you think of dinosaurs, you think of their extinction, but they roamed the earth for 165 million years. Compare that to our 6 million, and it's almost mind-boggling, at least to know. Edit. The modern form of humans is 200,000 years old. But if we include our humanoid ancestors, we've been here 6 million years. Edit 2. I get it. Dinosaurs are still around. What I meant to say was the dinosaur era. Contact lenses. Leonardo da Vinci had the idea of contact lenses in 1508 and the first successful contact lenses were made in 1888. Beer. It's one of the oldest prepared drinks in the world. It not only predates every civilization, but actually contributed to their creation. Ancient Egyptians who built the pyramids. The ancient Egyptians were as old to the ancient Romans as the ancient Romans are to us. The year 1990. We are as close to it as we are the year 2050. Stonehenge. It predates the oldest pyramid in Egypt by nearly 300 years. The first carbonated drink to be sold to the public was invented by Swiss watchmaker and amateur scientist J.J. Schwepp in 1783, who sold his delicious sparkling water to thirsty Thomas in Geneva in just 7 years. He was doing business so fast that he moved the factory to London and introduced a new flavor, sparkling lemon, to stand out from competitors who were trying to imitate his drink. For a lot of us, ourselves, I've known for a while that I'm older now than my mom and dad were when I was born, but the other day, I realized I actually have memories of them when they were younger than I'm now. That's proper weird to think about and really made me think I'm a lot older than I feel. That said, my parents are older than I think too. They're only a few years away from the age I remember my nana and granddad being. Trees. There are a lot of trees that are older than you would expect. Netflix. I feel like it is only a few years old, but it was invented in 1997. Astronomer here. The star HD 140283, also nicknamed the Methuselah star, is about 200 light years away from us and looks nondescript. However, if we take its composition and compare it to our standard models of stellar evolution for other, better studied stars, the star's age pops out as 14.460.8 billion years old. Let me remind you, the universe is thought to be about 13.8 billion years old, and we don't think we got the first stars until maybe 200 million years after that. Obviously, we do not think the Methuselah star is literally older than the universe, when it is more likely that we just don't understand stellar evolution for stars like it super well. However, it is exciting, because it is undoubtedly a very old star, and currently we do not have any observations of what the first stars were like in the universe. Called population II stars, it's thought they were larger than stars are today, because there were no metals from stellar fusion to contaminate the hydrogen gas, and they'd thus only live a few million years tops. As such, it's very interesting to have a very old star relatively next door to us in the Milky Way. It will be really interesting in coming years if other very early stars are finally observed to figure out how old they are and how they compare to this one. Oxford University. It's older than the Aztec Empire. The use of concrete. Its use goes as far back as the Mayans, but more notably in Egyptian construction as well as in Rome. The Romans had an arguably greater concrete mix than we currently have, but that was never passed down. Eventually the use of concrete fell out of popularity for centuries as we seemingly lost the information needed to create it, as if the recipe was thrown out and Doddy wrote it down. Also, Samuel L. Jackson, the man, is 71 years old, but looks like he hasn't aged in decades. Edit. Just to add on to this, Roman concrete is not only more eco-friendly as /u/bionic_ferry mentions, but it was actually more durable and became sturdier over time. The concrete we make today is made with Portland cement, which is a tale of silica sand, limestone, clay and other goodies. The process to make this has a large carbon offset and isn't great for the environment. Another downside to using this is that the world is running out of silica sand very fast. Silica sand, or industrial sand / white sand, is primarily composed of quartz. This is a chemically inert mineral with a solid hardness, which makes it highly desired for the specific use of making concrete. Regular sand, like desert sand, has many more impurities like RUM, iron, carbonate and other stuff that makes it more reactive and gives it a darker color. A more reactive sand is bad for a concrete mix and will make the structure more E2S and failure over time. Whereas a chemically inert mineral like quartz is just what the doctor ordered. Silica sand has many uses like water filtration systems, glass and ceramic work, sandblasting and industrial uses, like making high-grade concrete, with the world's supply of silica sand running dry at an alarming rate, with some countries like Vietnam at risk of running out of sand as soon as 2022. There is a need to find an alternative, or the Romans created concrete after possibly seeing the natural results through something called tough rocks. This is the combo of volcanic ash, lime and seawater. Because of the addition of seawater to this mix, two very rare minerals, aluminous berberite and phyllite, grow within the concrete. These minerals actually make the concrete mix stronger over time when exposed to seawater, which is in direct opposition to what happens to Portland concrete, or basically any modern day concrete, which erodes when exposed to seawater. We still do not know the recipe needed to make the concrete the ancient Romans made, but we can try to make it through reverse engineering and many countless experiments. Today scientists are not only looking into this, but also an alternative to modern day concrete, because of the diminishing presence of silica sand around the world in the carbon offset created when making it, while trying to quench the high demand for concrete globally. If you think this is interesting, pick up a book or start researching into this, and maybe you will be the one to find the solution to these problems. Like the guy who accidentally made the frosted light bulb front page yesterday, the guy who accidentally made post-it notes, or the one who solved those two calculus problems without knowing they were, at the time, famously unsolved. Also front page, you could eventually stumble upon a solution to this issue and be on the front page one day. You may not get the Reddit karma for it, but you could eventually go down in history. Also, I can't stress enough that Samuel L. Jackson has aged so well. Social media. Wealthy ancient Romans had a system where they used as scribes and messengers in order to share gossip and art/poetry and news updates with friends in their social circle. Google, Reddit, YouTube. It's hard to imagine that they already have been around for 15 years, with Google actually being around 20 years old. Our entire generation has now grown up that cannot remember that it wasn't always there. The food at the back of your cupboard. You are older than your teeth. Touchscreens. We think they're one of the main defining features of modern technology, since they only really got big in the late 2000s/early 2010s, but they were actually invented 55 years ago in 1965. It's kind of crazy to think about, but while most of our grandparents were getting rid of their black and white TVs, researchers already had touchscreen devices in the labs. It wasn't really until the 80s that it really got good, but by 90s it was easily sophisticated technology. In fact, Microsoft even had a Windows XP tablet out by 2001 that had seriously good finger/stylus recognition. But it didn't really pick up until smartphones became a thing a decade later. You could also consider the magnetic drawing board to be a touchscreen, since it more or less has a stylus and surface for you to draw on, but that was actually invented later than the touchscreen in 1974. The dinosaurs were older than grass, so the imagine of a triceratops grazing on a field of grass is inaccurate. Touchscreen in cars. That has been around since 1986. Roman law was so advanced that there are still large chunks of statutes in civil law countries taken pretty much directly from Roman codice written 1500 to 2000 years ago. Important maritime laws are adaptations of medieval provisions. Lots of business law statutes borrow heavily from Napoleonic laws in common law countries. You find stuff like the Statute of Marlborough from the 1200s, still in effect, along with still relevant case law from the 1700s. Commercial aircraft. Most are 10-15 years old, yet a lot of people think they get replaced like cars. They are still very safe though despite their age. Oxford University is the oldest English-speaking university in the world. Teaching began in Oxford University in 1096 and developed rapidly from 1167, when Henry II banned English students from attending the University of Paris. The founding of Tenochtitlan in 1325 marked the start of the Aztec civilization, which makes Oxford University more than 200 years older. Oxford is also 300 years older than Machu Picchu and 150 years older than the Easter Island Heads. Jennifer Lopez. Betty White. The wealthiest of the ancient Minoans had very close to modern day plumbing. The entire Minoan culture is really fascinating, not to mention their poor choice of clothing. Lol. A Native American empire nearly a third of the size of the present-day United States existed in the Great Lakes region at the time the Old Testament of the Bible was thought to be written. The world in general. The theory that, if all of the Earth's history were laid out on a calendar, our current century would only make up the last 10 seconds or so of December 31st always blows my mind, to consider it that way. A large portion of autism spectrum disorders, about 40% of them, have been in human genetics since around 14,000 BCE. Genetic bottleneck causing supervolcano eruption. The arrival of people in North America. Many scientists believe a sea route was used to navigate to the continent much earlier than the Bering Land Bridge. This is hard to prove, however, because any archaeological sites that could be found along shorelines are now well underwater. Nintendo DS. Humans with our intelligence and empathy and rationality. People in the past lacked education and our cumulative knowledge, but even cavemen thousands of years ago didn't differ too much from us. Cave of Forgotten Dreams, a documentary about cave paintings from 30,000 years ago, really drove this home for me. The art there is so expertly rendered, it really shows a thinking and curious mind. The AIDS virus, 1959. Edit. The first known case of detectable in humans was 1959. It was likely around before that. The first selfie was taken in 1839. The dinosaurs, they didn't know what grass was. The word meme. The 80s, they were 40 years ago, but it feels like 20 years ago. The Stanley Cup. It predates the NHL, and if you look at the history of teams that have won it, there is a year where it wasn't awarded due to the Spanish flu pandemic. The top of it is the original trophy, but the rings on the bottom are replaced every couple of years when they fill up with names. People born in 2000. Fireworks. In my experience, a lot of people I know personally don't realize that music cassettes were invented in the 60s. Cassettes didn't really take off in the States until the late 70s, but the first albums released on cassettes hit shelves in 1966. Light. It may only take 8 minutes for light to travel to Earth from surface of the sun, but the light bounces around inside the sun for over 10,000 years before it reaches the surface. The song Friday, technically, it's older than most third graders, having been released in 2011. Queen Elizabeth. Mammoths were known to exist until approximate 1600s BC. Lil Jon. While in college I discovered that my old trusty pregame hype man was born the same year as my dad. I'm 30, for scale. Suddenly, snap yo fingers meant arthritic relief. The outline struggles with dementia and out of your mind shots of Metamucil turned down for *CUPS era. What? I have a bottle of shampoo from the GDR. Electric cars. The first electric car capable of carrying a person was invented in 1881. Water. That water you're drinking is as old as the earth. Paul Rudd and Gwen Stefani are both older than Ted Cruz. Matchsticks. Shakira. She's 43. We are her. From the release date of the first Back to the Future movie, then Marty was from 1955. I used to write for a fact channel years ago and did a whole video on this. It was fun to research www.youtube.com/watch v equals 5620 sb7 vsc4 and ab_CHANNEL equals THOUGHTY2. Pornography, as we know it today, predates sliced bread by at least 50 years. The oldest surviving film is, of course, a French film called Les Coups d'Or au La Bonne Auberge, and was released in 1908. Chuck Norris, the Dude, is 80. Santa Fe, oldest capital city in America, being declared the capital of the New Mexican Territory by the Spanish Crown in 1610, making it 410 years old, far older than the US itself. How we view time when video games and movies come out and/or are edited in some way. Star Fox 64 came out about 24 years ago. Kevin from Home Alone is 40. Minecraft elytras. A bit different answer, but ancient people. A lot of times you hear people talk about the life expectancy of ancient people being around 35. So you picture a really young society when you think of the Romans, Egyptians, Mesopotamians, or even hunter-gatherers. This isn't really the case. The average is 35 because infant mortality and early childhood death was so common. If you just take the life expectancy of people who reach adulthood, 16, then the life expectancy is easily in the early 60s. There were plenty of 70 and even 80-year-olds 2000 years ago. Jared Leto, he's going to be 50 next year, but hasn't aged since the 90s. You, by the law of conservation of mass, no mass can be created or lost, simply moved or changed into something else. Your why and all inside of it and everything in the universe for that matter has been around since the very start, only in random atoms etc. And when we die, our IES are recycled back into the universe to be made into something cool like cow poo. The early 2000s, I still don't think of it as 20 years ago. The idea that everything's getting worse and that the world's coming to an end soon. Sure, there's new vocabulary and new science involved, but people have been sounding that pessimistic alarm throughout history. Edit. No, not trying to deny climate change. This has also been a fact of life for a while. A lot of fads have this sense of modernity to them, that you have an Instagram influencer pushing a ruct and everyone leaps onto it in order to be hip and cool, but it's nothing compared to the way people followed trends in the past. I've written about the case of French people having surgery because it was fashionable before, but there are dozens of examples. Even something as basic as a fork only became popular because Catherine de Medici made it trendy in the courts of France. Before then, it was considered positively barbaric because it allowed you to eat too quickly and without grace. And then there are the fashion trends that were literally lethal, like lead oxides to whiten skin for purely aesthetic reasons. After all, pale skin meant you weren't tanned, which was hard to pull off unless you were rich enough that you didn't have to work outside. You don't see a lot of pale farmers, and then you get what we'd call viral challenges today. You think planking was dumb? Well, you would have loved phone booth stuffing, which was huge in the 50s and involved trying to cram as many people as possible into a phone booth. Why? Just because the more things change, the more they stay the same. Aboriginal Australians. Earth. Among Us. MetLife Insurance was founded in 1868, Shell in 1875. Conspiracy theorist Bill Burr always says, go to any big city, the two biggest buildings will be insurance companies and banks. 3.5mm headphone jack, made in the 1950s. For transistor radios. It originally developed from the 1/4 inch plug which was first used in a telephone switchboard in Boston around 1878. Plastic surgery was mentioned in Egyptian text dated back to 3000 to 2500 BC. These were carried out by Sushruta in India during 800 BC. The theory of quantum mechanics. Some of the earliest discoveries in the field date back to the early 19th century, starting with Faraday's discovery of cathode rays in 1838, Gustav Kirchhoff's work on black-Y radiation in 1850, and Boltzmann's theory of discrete energy states in 1877. The name itself was coined by Maximum Born, Werner Heisenberg, and Wolfgang Pauli in the early 1920s. For comparison, the theory of plate tectonics was first put forward in 1912 and wasn't widely accepted until 1965. The year 2000 still feels like yesterday. The song Black Betty by Ram Jam used to be a marching song in the Revolutionary War, and Black Betties were muskets. Of course the lyrics did change a bit, but it's still pretty cool that we are rocking out to songs created by people dreads of years ago. Cardboard has been around since colonial times, at least I learned this at the bookmaker's shop in Colonial Williamsburg a few years ago. Totally blew my mind. The first ever third movie, The Power of Love, was made in 1923. Vibrators. A physician invented the first in the early 1880s because doctors used to treat female hysteria by bringing women to. A lot of what we think of as modern human advancements predate Sapiens or someone else did it first, including stone tools. Simple ones predate the genus 3.3 million years ago, either Australopithecus or Kenyanthropus. It was all pretty impressive by the time Sapiens even showed up. Harnessing fire, Homo us, 1 Maya, burying the dead, Neanderthals, 100,000. Yap, medication. They found a Neanderthal specimen that was chewing on penicillin and aspirin, poplar bark, which Wolf helped with his tooth infection from 40,000 yap. The Earth. It is almost impossible to comprehend how much time goes by in 4.65 billion years. When a human lifespan is 80 years, our brain can't really understand that larger quantity of time. Ferns. The fern class Polypodiopsida, class of non-flowering vascular plants that possess true roots, stems, and complex leaves and that reproduce by spore, constitute an ancient lichen of vascular plants. Some of them as old as the Carboniferous period, beginning about 358.9 million years ago, and perhaps older. Their type of life cycle, dependent upon spores for dispersal, long preceded the seed plant life cycle. For comparison, that puts them about 113 million years older than non-bird dinosaurs, which lived between about 245 and 66 million years ago. Rollerblades. They have experimented with designs dating back to 1760. The heliocentric model and atomic theory. Aristarchus first came up with the heliocentric model 2 centuries before the birth of Jesus, and Leucippus proposed atomism 5 centuries before the birth of Jesus. When we say the Greeks were the basis of Western culture, the more you learn, the more you discover how true that really is. We spent 2 millennia catching up to where the Greeks were at. Nintendo. SpongeBob. It has been going strong since 1999. Ourselves. I turned 23 today, but man, I still feel like I was 18 yesterday. Tom Cruise. Pyramids of Giza. Cleopatra lived closer to the first Burger King being built than the pyramids. The name Tiffany. It dates back to about the 12th century, but no one can use it in a period piece because it sounds too modern. There's a whole trope about it called the Tiffany problem. D's nuts. Way before that got eaten guy. It's been around for over 30 years and still going strong. I think it originated from a rap song in the early 90s, slowly transitioned to a juvenile game in JR/high school of answering questions with D's nuts. Computers. Things all have been around for nearly a century at this point. Some folks think that they only just appeared in the 80s and onwards. They've been around for a very long time. It's only recent that they've become small and powerful enough to be fitted into your own house. Retractable roofs on stadiums. The Colosseum had a version of this called a velarium, which was a large awning that could be used to cover the seating areas and was controlled through a series of pulleys. The Colosseum also had rudimentary elevators, used mostly to transport wild animals and scenery pieces from the storage areas to the arena floor. The Queen of England. The Area 51 meme. That's a year old now. The rise and fall of the Aztec civilization all occurred since the founding of Oxford University. No joke. Abolishment of right happened in the BC era as well, so since then, no one has any excuse. Me, according to my grandma. Yo mama. Everything, because when we think of it time passes and it's already older. Me. Cotton Eye Joe still don't know where dude came from, like where did he even go? Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest man-made structure that is 12,000 years old. It is found in southeastern Turkey and predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the pyramids by over 8,000 years. Batteries. In 1938 someone found a clay jar from 200 BC. It has an asphalt stopper with an iron rod in it along with a copper cylinder surrounding it. It has a vinegar-like fluid in it. A lab made replicas of it and found that it could use 2 volts of electricity. Why would people in 200 BC need batteries? Oddie knows, but who cares? It's still cool that there are batteries from 200 BC. Nintendo is more than 100 years old. Machine learning. Oxford University. It predates the Aztecs. Teaching started there as early as 1096. Source: https://www.smithsonianmag.com/smart news/ Oxford University is older than the Aztecs 1,529,607/. Trees IDK. If it's just me, but I only think that trees can only live up 200 years, but there are currently trees that are as old as 3,600 years. There are at least 13 trees around the world, dead but standing, that existed before Christ. These ones are common for Adittil and similar subreddits, but I haven't seen them in a while, so here it goes. Sharks have been around on this planet for longer than trees have existed. The Great Pyramids of Giza were already about 2,000 years old at the start of the Roman Empire, so the pyramids were as old to the Romans as Roman and Greek architecture like the Parthenon or the Colosseum are to us. Avocados. Joshua trees and many other tree species in the Americas relied on much larger animals to cultivate them than are around today, such as the giant ground sloth. To cultivate them, avocados would almost certainly be extinct today if humans hadn't begun to cultivate them. No matter who wins the election this year, it will be the oldest president we have elected by at least 4 years, as Trump is already the current record holder. President Carter has been alive longer than any former US president, so long in fact, IG was born the year after he had left the presidency. If he had won the presidency, it would be the first time a president had been born after a living president had left office. Betty White has had the longest film and television career of anyone. She is literally older than sliced bread. The 90s are now as long ago as the 60s were in the 90s. YouTube been around since 2005, and it was a very different place back then. Dinosaurs. The Stegosaurus and the T-Rex lived longer apart than the Stegosaurus and us. Beats by Dre first came out 14 years ago. Warren Beatty is 83. The 90s, that was 30 years ago. Gold. It still fascinates me that it can only be formed during a supernova or when neutron stars collide. That means the gold in the phone I'm typing this on now is older than the solar system and the sun that is setting. Queen Elizabeth II. The precursor to social media was Alba Amicorum, which is Latin for books of friends, found in 16th century Netherlands. The books were compendiums of the owner's social lives, frivolous opinions, political predilection, effusions over theatre and novels, as well as amorous indiscretions that were disseminated between friend groups for commentary. It's positively anachronistic. The London Underground, the oldest part, opened to passengers in 1863. The moon landing, Challenger and Columbia disasters. Last year, NASA celebrated 50 years since landing on the moon, but to put that into perspective, the time from the first landing on the moon until the Challenger disaster is a shorter amount of time than from the Challenger disaster until the Columbia disaster. The time from the first landing on the moon until the Challenger disaster is a shorter amount of time than the time since the Columbia disaster. Bonus pandemic fact: the moon landing is closer in time to the end of the Spanish flu pandemic than it is to the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Billiards. Cleopatra had a billiard table. Edit. Apparently I'm wrong about that. https://www.mentalfloss.com/article/602920/Shakespeare anachronisms. Oxford University records don't show when it was created, but teaching records start around the 1100s. It even predates the Aztecs, Machu Picchu, and the Eastern Island heads. Domesticated dogs. The relationship of humans living with dogs, or some kind of domesticated wolf creature, dates back over 15,000 years. Some of the earliest known fossils of sapiens are found with dog bones. Essentially, the bond between man and dog goes back further than we can even document. Colored photographs. Naturally colored photography was invented in 1891, but the majority still used black and white for quite some time due to costs and style preference. The Elytra was added to Minecraft 5 years ago. The pandemic. It feels as if it came here yesterday, but it's already been 7 months. Paul Rudd. This comment will probably never be seen, but definitely Nintendo. Nintendo was founded in Kyoto, and in 1889 by Fusajiro Yamauchi. Originally it was a playing card company, which became incredibly popular and this is the exact same video game company we see in stores today. Göbekli Repeat. Thousands of years older than the pyramids. IDK about anyone else, but the printing press for me. I thought it was made in the 1800s, but it was actually made in 1440. Written history wasn't developed until later, but oral tradition reaches back as long as 40,000 years among Australian Aboriginal people, as verified by accounts of volcanic eruptions, sea level rise, and now extinct animals. The ancient Aryan city of Nineveh was already an ancient mythical ruin barely anyone knew anything about by the time Xenophon of Athens came across it 2500 years ago. Despicable Me. It's 10 years old today. Python. Plenty of people think it's a trendy new programming language, but it was released 2 years before the internet. Python, February 20th, 1991, and the World Wide Web, April 30th, 1993. Marcus Rashford and Anthony Marshall and Olga Nasolskja, and especially Juan Mata. Joe. Facts. Water.